Hey everybody, welcome to another video about some spooky stuff. I am so excited to tell you about this story that I found, and it is a true story, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. And this is one of those cases where I knew about it maybe about 10-ish years ago because I was considering writing a play about it. However, it never came to fruition, so I kind of forgot about it, or I shelved it for a little bit, and it wasn't until the quarantine was happening, I was trying to find some new cases, new paranormal stories to talk about when I ran into this case. And I found it really compelling, and I'm actually really shocked that this wasn't talked about more in the paranormal circuit. Like, I think it should be discussed as much as like Amityville Horror and all these other, really famous cases that kind of get regurgitated all the time. So I'm excited to tell you about this. Let's get started. But wait, before we get started, be sure to take a moment to subscribe to my channel. If you're watching this on Facebook, give my Facebook page a like. If you're watching this on Instagram, be sure to like the video and follow me as well. I'm always posting paranormal content. I like to talk about haunted places, haunted cases, theories, and all that great stuff. And I'm always putting out something new. Thank you for your support. Now, let's get started. The scenario of possession has always been fascinating to me because how does one get to the point where they become possessed? Now, in the paranormal circuit, and even just in the horror movie genre, when we think of possession, we automatically think that it's a demon possessing that person. However, apparently ghosts can also possess people as well. Now, this is something I haven't seen personally. I've had clients who believe they may have been possessed by a ghost, but I never really saw enough evidence to support that. And you don't see a lot of cases where a ghost or an angel is possessing a human. We always hear about the demonic cases. So when I found the Watseka Wonder, I was immediately intrigued and wanted to dive in more. And like I mentioned earlier, this was something I wanted to write a play about. And thanks to the quarantine, I decided it was time to dig a little deeper into this, and wow, there's a lot of information here. So this might be a longer video. I know the blog version of this is really long. It's like double what I usually write. So it's a lot of details, it's a lot of numbers. I'm going to try to keep this as high level as possible. If you are interested in learning more about the Watseka Wonder, I highly recommend looking up the original text by Dr. E. Winchester Stevens, who wrote his entire account of the case. There's also newspaper articles, there's many podcasts that have covered this story in different varieties. There's a lot of information out there. Well, I don't want to say a lot because I think I can count them all on one hand, but there's really good sources out there that you can check out if you want to learn more about the Watseka Wonder after you're done watching this video. I'm going to talk about this story in two different time periods. So I'm going to talk about when the Watseka Wonder started. So we have to go to 1876, that's where we're going to start our story, when 12-year-old Marylurancy Vennum, she was known as Rancy, she went to her parents one night and said, "Hey, there's spirits in my room and they're trying to talk to me." And of course, having spirits trying to talk to you in your bedroom is not normal. And the other thing was, these spirits were calling out to her by her nickname, which was Rancy. So you hear, Rancy, Rancy. Okay, maybe not that dramatic, but they were also trying to touch her face. So not only was she hearing spirits calling out to her by her nickname, but they were also trying to touch her. And so she was trying to sleep with her parents, and her parents were like, "No, go back to your room." Her whole family was actually very devout Methodist, so this was definitely a no-no, especially in the town of Watseka, Illinois. And if you're wondering where Watseka, Illinois is, it's about 85 miles south of Chicago, so it's very much in rural America. So if you thought that the story stopped at spirits calling out to Lurrancy Vennum and trying to touch her face, well, there's more. In 1877, 13-year-old Rancy was starting to have what was described as cataleptic fits. And some of these fits were so bad that her feet were actually touching her head. So the accounts were indicating that her body was like folding in half. And then after these fits, well, sometimes in between these fits, she would start going into trances and she would start describing spirits and angels that were around. And she even saw the spirits of her siblings who died when they were really, really young. It was incredible. And her parents, again, very devout Methodists, they didn't really know what to think of this. And by the time 1878 rolled around, Lurrancy was starting to have these fits up to 12 times per day, so this was really starting to affect her quality of life. And then apparently during these fits, Lurrancy was starting to get possessed by these spirits that would come around, and some of them weren't so nice. And let's keep in mind, we're talking about late 1870s in the middle of Watseka, Illinois. You know, Lurrancy's parents are devout Methodists, and the townsfolk are starting to talk about what's going on. There was whisperings that her parents were about ready to put her in an insane asylum, which, let's be honest, back then, insane asylums weren't really used for treatment, but more of just putting away the problem. And I mean, people were pretty much getting tortured in these asylums at the time. Going to these asylums was pretty much almost I don't want to say a death sentence, but it definitely meant there wasn't really a lot of hope of recovery. Keep in mind, Lurrancy's parents loved their daughter dearly. They did not want her to go to an asylum. As I mentioned before, there was whisperings that this was actually going to happen. The Vennums were actually visited by a couple. It was Asa and Ann Roth. And Asa and Ann Roth were spiritualists, and they had built a home, one of the first homes in Watseka, Illinois, and Asa Roth was very well respected and very highly regarded in his community. What's interesting about that is spiritualism wasn't seen as the most ethical or reputable religion to be a part of. It was actually looked down upon quite a bit, and people thought it was a little too cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But Asa seemed to just keep it on the down low. Whoop, I got excited there. I guess as long as you kept it quiet, you know, being a spiritualist was okay, and Asa seemed to get away with that. The Roths pleaded with the Vennums to not send Lurrancy to an asylum, and there's a reason for that, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. Instead of sending Lurrancy to an asylum, Asa brought in a doctor. His name was E. Winchester Stevens, and he was more of like a spiritualist type of doctor. And so he went to go meet Lurrancy, and the first thing that they see is Lurrancy is sitting in a chair, her elbows are on her knees, and her hands are under her chin, and she's hunched over like an old woman. And Lurrancy, well, apparently she wasn't Lurrancy anymore. She started like talking like really like an old woman. She started asking the doctor some really weird questions like, who are you? Do you have children? Where are you from? Just like really invasive, annoying questions. And she was also calling her dad Old Black Dick and her mom Old Granny. Okay, so we got something a little weird going on here. Instead of, you know, telling the Vennums, hey, I think it's time to send Lurrancy to an asylum, Dr. Stevens actually engaged with Lurrancy as this old woman. And Dr. Stevens asked, what's your name? Lurrancy said, my name is Katrina Hoag, I'm 63 years old, and I'm from Germany. This is the really abridged version of it. And after a little bit more questioning, then another spirit by the name of Willie came through. Apparently he had died not too long ago, and he was just not nice. Apparently, if I read it correctly, Willie was pretending to be Katrina Hoag, and he was possessing Lurrancy's body, and Lurrancy came back. She came to. She lamented that all these spirits are doing terrible things through her, and she felt really bad about what was going on, and she didn't know how to stop it. And then Dr. Stevens had an idea. He said, well, maybe you should let more pleasant spirits come through. Spirits that are more pure and innocent. And he told her to look around the room and see what spirits are there that were pleasant, positive, pure, innocent, you know, all of the synonyms, fill in the blanks. And Lurrancy looked around the room, and she said that there was one woman that stepped forward, and the angels wanted her to come, and that her name was Mary Roff. Do you remember what Asa and Ann's last name were? It was Roff. And of course, when Asa Roff heard this, he said, that's my daughter. Mary Roff is my girl, and she has been in heaven for 12 years. Let her come. We will be glad to let her come. So we're going to get to the really interesting part now. Well, one of the really interesting parts. Who is Mary Roff? Mary Roff was born on October 8th, 1846. When she was a baby, when she was really young, her family was moving all over the country. But at just 6 months old, Mary started to have these fits. They were described as fits, and I'm pretty sure they were seizures. Her eyes would dilate, you know, she'd shake, she'd stiffen up, she'd have rigid limbs, she would fall into a deep and catatonic sleep at 6 months old when she was just a little baby. And apparently after the first fit that Mary had, she laid in a catatonic sleep and just didn't move for several days, and her family actually lost hope of her recovering. Mary recovered, but then the fits happened all over again, and it was just like this pattern that just kept going and going and going throughout her young life. In 1859, the Roths finally settled in this town called South Middleport, Illinois, and that eventually became Watseka, Illinois. And as, like I said before, they built one of the first houses in the area. And sadly, as Mary got older, her fits got worse. They escalated to an unimaginable level. And by the time Mary was 10, she was having fits like 4 or even 5 times per day. And what was interesting is, in between these fits, she was pretty much normal. Like, she would play piano and she would sing. Her favorite song was "We Are Coming, Sister Mary." But of course, with all of these fits that were happening, her quality of life was greatly affected. I mean, wouldn't yours be? And she also fell into a deep depression as she was growing up. I mean, her friends were getting married, having kids. She wasn't. Keep in mind, getting married and having kids probably happened at like 15 or 16. So, and by the time Mary was 15, her depression was at its peak, and what didn't help was her fits were increasing. And in 1864, Mary started bloodletting, bleeding herself, especially in the head, because she had a fit of pain or a lump of pain in her head. Her doctors even tried prescribing leeches, so Mary started using the leeches excessively, and she even kept these little leeches as pets. So we're kind of diving into the area of self-harm, so just to warn you all, it's going to get a little graphic in a minute, and I deeply apologize for that. On July 16th, 1864, around 9 a.m., Mary took a knife from her kitchen and went into the backyard. And she cut her arm so deeply that she lost quite a bit of blood, and she fainted. Mary was unconscious until about 2 p.m. and when she awoke, she was violent. She was described as a raving maniac. It took 5 men to hold her down, and keep in mind, Mary barely weighed 100 pounds, and she was still strong enough to need 5 men to hold her down so that she wouldn't hurt herself. And they actually had to put covers on her eyes so she wouldn't like scratch her own eyes out. And then she became calm, and she slept for about 15 hours. And then Mary woke up, and she had the blindfolds over her eyes, and she was still able to see with the blindfolds on. After this, Mary was back to normal as if nothing had happened, but there was something weird. She couldn't recognize anybody around her, and she was described as losing all sense of sight, feeling, and hearing in the natural way. That's mentioned quite a bit. She could also read while blindfolded. There was a report saying that she took a book out, an encyclopedia out, and she was able to look up and define the word blood. And keep in mind, Mary kind of did have an obsession with blood prior to this because of the bloodletting, the leeches, and whatnot. So some people speculate that maybe she memorized that definition. But there was something else that happened too. She was able to read letters blindfolded. She was able to give information about letters that hadn't even been opened yet. During this time, I mean, because of everything that happened with Mary Roff, everybody around town knew what was happening. Kind of like Lurrancy. There was a newspaper editor from the Danville Times that came with a sealed letter, and he brought it to the Roth home. Mary flipped the letter around. She didn't open it. She was blindfolded, and she was able to say who the sender was of the letter. And the newspaper editor opened the letter, looked at the name, and Mary was right. And I think Mary was even able to spell that person's name. And then Asa, her father, and a pastor tried to trick her. They tried to put in like other letters in there that weren't hers. While blindfolded, she was able to pick out those letters and say, oh, this isn't mine. So I found that case incredibly interesting, especially since she was blindfolded through all of this. And even some of the most prominent citizens of Watseka went to go check her out and investigate her, because I guess that was a thing back in the 1800s. And of course, during this time, Mary was still having fits. She started to hear voices that were telling her to do things. She would go into trances and speak with different voices, and spirits were also apparently taking over her body. Mary would be stiff as a board, except for her face, so that she would still be able to talk. This is where we get back to the, the asylum and psychiatric care back in the 1800s. She was under the care of doctors throughout this entire time, and she was sent to an asylum, I believe in Peoria, Illinois, and she was put through a water cure for 18 months. Now, a water cure back then, it's not pleasant. I mean, if you were somebody who didn't have a lot of energy and you were just kind of blah, you were put through a cold bath to get energized. If you were too hyper, you were put in a warm bath to calm down. But sometimes, you know, patients were also put into ice baths to cure things, all sorts of things. Look up water cure. It's, when you look back at that and you're like, that's not okay. Why did they think that this would work? But Mary went through that for 18 months. And sadly, Mary's life was cut off prematurely. She died at the age of 19 in 1865. Now, I've read some reports that she died in the asylum. I also read reports that she came home for 3 days. The house that her family built in 1860, that's the house that she died in, and apparently it's the only reported death that took place in that house, according to the Chicago Tribune. At this point, Lurrancy would have only been, I think, maybe a year or so old when Mary Roff died, and also the Roffs and the Vennums lived in two opposite ends of Watseka. This probably wouldn't have been something that the Vennums would have really known about, because they were really just two separate families. And of course, 12 years later, Mary Roff makes herself known to Lurrancy Vennum and her family. So now we're back to Lurrancy Vennum. After Lurrancy said, oh, this spirit that wants to come to me and possess me is Mary Roff, and of course Asa Roff is, that's my daughter, she's been in heaven for 12 years, yes, we'll have her. Basically, it was like this prearranged thing, like, okay, Mary's gonna take over Lurrancy's body on this date. When that happened, which was probably a day or so later, I'm going to refer at Lurrancy as Mary, because for my sanity and to help you keep track of this, it's gonna be easier. So right now, Lurrancy is Mary. Well, Mary is Lurrancy. Yeah, so Mary took possession of Lurrancy's body. She was still living with the Vennums, and she's like, I don't know you people. I am really freaked out right now. I want to go home. Mr. Roth, Asa Roth, arranged for his wife to go pick up Mary from the Vennums. This incredible thing happened. Mary still remembered her neighbors. She knew the nicknames of her neighbors and her friends. And she even knew the nickname for her sister, Minerva. When Mary was inside the house and she saw her mom and her sister come over one day, she said, oh, there's Ma and Nervy. That was interesting. And there was even one of Mary's friends who had been married. She's been married a couple times, and the first time she was married, that was when Mary was alive, and Mary knew her by her first married name. And then that friend got married again after Mary died. Mary Roff said something to the effect of, oh, it's Mary Lord, but Mary Lord was the first married name. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. Also, the famous box of letters came up. And Mary said, why haven't you shown me my letters? The letters was a big thing. Now, granted, the letter situation made the press, so, yeah, you know, I kind of questioned that a little bit. However, there was a little tattered collar in the box of letters because, you know, that was, you know, when you have a loved one that has passed, you know, you save their keepsakes and whatnot, and the collar was one of them. And Mary was able to talk about the story behind that collar. And Mary would also talk to her dad and say, Dad, who was it that said, confound it, confound it? And she would just laugh and laugh and laugh, knowing it was her dad, Asa, that said, confound it. Confound it, confound it. Confound it. And then Asa had Anne put a velvet headdress in plain view, I believe in the parlor or the living room, so that it would be in Mary's view, and just to see if Mary would notice it. And sure enough, Mary noticed it and said, oh, this is my headdress that I wore when my hair was short. And then Asa even had Mary talk about the cut on her arm, you know, the infamous cut from the backyard. And she lifted up, rolled up her sleeve and said, oh, well, this arm isn't mine. My arm is in the ground. Mary also wouldn't eat with the Roths, and instead she would go into these trances, and I don't know, I guess it was her heavenly breaks or something. The spirit of one of the house servants' grandmother came through Lurrancy's body, because apparently Lurrancy's body was a free-for-all for possessions. There was another friend who had a spirit come through and was asking the Roths and the Vennums if Lurrancy's body could be used for a trip to, I think it was Wisconsin, for 2 weeks so that the spirit could see their family. That was a hard no. Again, these details are really hard to keep track of, so I definitely recommend reading the blog too. Also, there was another thing that happened where Mary Roff, her brother, was healthy at the time, but she warned her parents that he was about to get really sick, and if there wasn't any medical attention made, then her brother would die. They were like, okay. But sure enough, Mary's brother got really sick, and luckily he was able to be tended to, and he survived. So how did Mary know that? I don't know. It's interesting. And another thing was, Mary was also really affectionate with Asa and Anne. Like, she was always kissing them and hugging them. They would ask her, they'd say, Mary, why are you so, like, physically affectionate with us? And she would say, I want to kiss you as long as I have lips, and I want to hug you, like, as long as I can, because I'll still be able to be with you in spirit, but I won't be able to touch you. So, and I won't lie, that part kind of broke my heart a little bit. Towards the end of Mary's time possessing Lurrancy's body, Rancy was coming back pretty quickly, like in and out, and it was agreed that on May 21st, 1878, was when Lurrancy would come back to her body. So basically during this time, Mary was taking possession of Lurrancy's body while Lurrancy was in heaven healing from her health issues. So after some tearful and really emotional goodbyes, Mary went back to heaven and Lurrancy took control of her body again. And when that happened, she looked at the Roths and said, Mr. Roth, I really want to go home now. Gosh, I can't imagine what not just Mary's parents were going through, like getting a second chance to be with their daughter after she had passed, but also for the Vennums and watching their daughter or their daughter's body live with another family and show them affection and love. And it's like my heart. Lurrancy didn't have any more fits after this. She actually lived a pretty normal life. She got married. She had 11 children. According to Dr. Stevens, apparently Mary would possess Lurrancy during childbirth, so I guess Lurrancy didn't really feel pain during this time. I'm not sure. I don't know how much of that is credible, but I thought that was interesting. Lurrancy would also visit the Roths pretty often, and one podcast like alluded to the idea that Lurrancy would let Mary take over again so Mary could visit with her parents. We'll see. But I know Lurrancy did move to Kansas with her husband, so she moved away from Watseka, Illinois. And then somehow Lurrancy ended up in Los Angeles, California. I think it might have been because of one of her children. So Lurrancy passed away in LA in 1952. So she lived a really long life and a very fulfilling life. And I have to say, rarely do we get happy endings like this. I think Mary's parents probably felt awful about putting her in an asylum, how they probably handled Mary's situation, and with Mary possessing Lurrancy's body, this gave them a second chance. It gave them some kind of redemption. I mean, and I'll say, like, if I had a chance to spend more time with my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, I mean, I would take it. So I don't blame the Roths at all. Mary Roff's story was truly a really sad and tragic one. I mean, she didn't really get to live her life to the fullest because of her health condition. And we have to wonder, what was this health condition? Was it spiritual? Was it biological? Because it also affected Lurrancy Vennum, and she was cured after that. I mean, it could have been a brilliant form of therapy too, you know, redirecting the negative spirits that are possessing me to, hey, choose a spirit that's more positive. But then at the same time, how did Lurrancy know all of these little tiny details about Mary Roff's life? That's the thing that's been the hardest to debunk, unless this was like the greatest hoax of all time that over a dozen people were involved in. However, if there's any shred of truth to this story, then we have some of the most compelling evidence for the survival of consciousness after death. Or, to put it simply, we may have some proof of life after death. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, like the pages, like the Instagram account, wherever you're watching this from, and feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you think of this case. Like I said, this is one of the most interesting ones I've ever come across, and I think it should be talked about more. Feel free to send me a DM on Instagram, send me a Facebook message. I'd love to talk to you about this. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next round.